The hum of 18 wheels beneath you fades into background noise after a while. A decade of hauling loads across the Midwest has taught me to find solace in that steady rhythm. I've been behind the wheel of the same Peterbilt 389 since 2015, weaving through Ohio and neighboring states more times than I could tally. People often assume truck driving is dull. They picture endless asphalt and repeating scenery, and sure, that's not entirely wrong. But the open road has a way of revealing things that don't make sense in daylight. Over the years, I've kept a sort of log. It started as quick notes on my phone, stuff I didn't want to slip away. Now, it's turned into a bit of an obsession, chronicling the bizarre moments I've experienced while out here alone. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or anything. I'm just saying I can't explain all the things I've come across. Let me tell you about one of them. This one happened around 8 years back, somewhere along Interstate 70, heading east. It was early October, and Ohio's autumn was in full display, bright, fiery leaves everywhere. I was transporting car parts from Indianapolis to Columbus, a route I'd driven 100 times or more. It was about 3 a.m. One of those hours when your eyes get heavy, the caffeine's worn off, and you've still got miles left. The highway was nearly deserted, just me and the rare car here and there. I checked my side mirrors, nothing but blackness behind me. Right as I passed mile marker 347. That's when my lights picked her up. A woman standing at the roadside, arm out with her thumb raised like she was looking for a ride, in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m. She wore a light blue sundress, which made no sense in the chilly 40-degree air, and her long, dark hair whipped wildly in the breeze. No bag, no belongings, just standing there staring right at me as I rolled by. I don't usually stop for hitchhikers, especially not at that hour, but something about her presence chilled me to the bone, and it wasn't the autumn wind. In the brief moment it took to pass her, I swear she didn't blink, just stared with these lifeless eyes that tracked me as I drove past. The logical part of my brain kicked in. Maybe she'd broken down, maybe she was heading to the next exit on foot, but that didn't explain the odd outfit or why she was completely alone. I called it in over the radio, hoping another driver might check on her. 2 truckers chimed in, saying they'd just driven past that same stretch, and none of them saw any woman. I might have chalked it up to sleep deprivation and an overactive imagination, if not for what happened next. Roughly 20 miles down the interstate, I pulled into a rest area to hit the restroom and grab a hot coffee. On my way back to the rig, steaming cup in hand, I happened to glance toward the cab of my Peterbilt. She was there, the same woman, calmly seated in the passenger side of my locked truck, staring forward with her hands neatly folded in her lap. The coffee slipped from my grip as I scrambled for my keys, heart pounding. But by the time I flung the door open, the seat was empty. No trace she'd ever been inside, no damp footprints, no shift in the cushion, nothing. I couldn't sleep the rest of the drive, and even now I get a shiver when I pass by milepost 347. I've never laid eyes on her again, but I've heard plenty of drivers talk about a lady in a blue dress along that same stretch of highway. Some claim she died in a hit and run back in the 1980s. Others say Her appearances go back to the 1950s. All I know is what I witnessed, and I've got no rational explanation. This next one has been going on for years, and I'm not the only one who's picked it up. Talk to any long-haul trucker who crosses eastern Ohio regularly and mention the midnight exchange. You'll see their expression shift. It always kicks in past midnight, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning, and it nearly always happens on empty rural roads where CB chatter is rare. First you hear the static, then a voice fades in. Sounds like an older guy, rough and raspy, like someone who's smoked hand-rolled cigarettes his whole life. He always starts the same way. Breaker 19, this is eastbound Charlie calling westbound Mac. You on the line, Mac? Over. The first time I caught it, I didn't think much of it. Truckers chat over CBs all the time. It helps fight off the fatigue. But then another voice answered, younger, still male. This is westbound Mac. I got you, Charlie. Where you at? Over. That's when it starts getting strange. The back and forth seems normal at first. Talking weather, road conditions, the usual. But the longer you listen, the more you notice they're naming roads that don't exist, mentioning towns no map shows. And the conversation always drifts toward one topic, a horrible crash that hasn't happened yet. Keep your eyes open near Dayton tonight, Charlie will say. Big pileup coming. 17 vehicles, just 2 will walk away. When's it going down, Charlie? Mac will ask. And Charlie always replies, already happened, son. 3 decades ago tonight. I was there, and so were you. Then the signal fades, and static takes over. Nothing else comes through. Here's the thing. I've tried replying to them, and I know other drivers have too, but they never respond. It's like we don't even exist to them. I've questioned highway patrol officers about any major wrecks around Dayton, but nothing lines up with Charlie's description. Then, about 3 years back, I was making a run during a nasty storm, near where Ohio meets West Virginia, when that eerie dialogue started again. It creeped me out, sure, but the rain was coming down in sheets, and I had bigger concerns, could barely see the road. That's when Charlie's voice came through, clearer than I'd ever heard. Eastbound rig at marker 221. This is Charlie. Pull over immediately, driver, right now. He was speaking to me. I was eastbound, and I had just passed mile marker 220. Every hair on my body stood up. Eastbound driver, I'm not fooling around. Get off the road in the next quarter mile or you won't make it back. There was something in the way he said it that made me obey. I eased onto the shoulder, flashers blinking. Not even 60 seconds later, a bolt of lightning slammed into a tree less than a football field ahead. The tree toppled straight across the highway, right where I would have been if I hadn't stopped. I was frozen, trembling. Then I grabbed my mic. Charlie, eastbound here. No idea how you knew, but thank you. No reply. Just the static again. This next thing happened last winter, and it still makes me uneasy. I was hauling freight across the eastern counties, taking Highway 93 for the view rather than the interstate. The clock was ticking past late evening, and a snowstorm was starting to roll in. The forecast hadn't predicted anything serious, but Ohio winters don't follow rules. By 9 p.m., snow was falling so heavily I couldn't see 20 feet ahead. I had to pull over and wait it out. That's when I spotted what looked like a truck stop glowing faintly up the road. I didn't recognize it, but in a whiteout, you don't get picky. I pulled in, surprised to find about half a dozen other rigs already parked. It looked dated, but everything was clean and in good shape. One of those family-run places that are vanishing thanks to corporate chains. A sign out front read, "Halliday's Rest Stop," a name unfamiliar to me, but all I wanted was a warm drink and a restroom. As soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. The spot was tidy and warm, featuring a small diner area and a section that looked like an old-fashioned convenience store. Soft tunes from the 1950s drifted from hidden speakers. But what stood out most was that despite all the trucks outside, only 2 people were inside. A woman around 50 stood behind the counter wearing a name tag that read Doris, and an elderly man in a flannel shirt sat alone at the counter. "Evening," she greeted with a friendly smile. "Just you tonight?" I nodded, brushing the snow from my boots. "Came out of nowhere," I muttered. "Yeah, it usually does," she replied, already pouring me coffee without even asking. "Tonight's special's meatloaf," she said. I thanked her and slid into a booth a few seats from the old man. The whole setup felt strange, like stepping into another era. No Wi-Fi password anywhere, no television humming. Even the menu looked outdated, and the prices were oddly cheap. The old guy noticed me looking around and gave a small nod. "First time at Halliday's?" "Yeah," I admitted. "Don't usually pass through these parts." He let out a low laugh. "No one really plans to. The weather always seems to guide folks in." Something in his tone made the hairs on my arms rise. I tried focusing on the menu, but I could sense him watching. Doris came by with the coffee, and I asked for the meatloaf. While waiting, I grabbed my phone to check the forecast. No bars. Nothing. "Phone won't work out here, sweetie," Doris said as she walked by. "Never does." I ate quickly, not saying much. The food was surprisingly tasty, but the whole place gave off an odd feeling I couldn't shake. The old man kept glancing my way, and I realized he hadn't eaten a bite, just holding that one mug of coffee. When I was done, I asked for the bill. $8.50, Doris said, and it's cash only. I paid and left a big tip. Something in my gut told me it was smart to stay on her good side. "Spending the night here?" she asked as she counted my change. "I'll be in my sleeper," I said. "Storm should blow over by dawn," she said, then gave me a look I couldn't read. Might be wise to move along now. There's a road that clears up about 5 miles east. Then the old man spoke. "She's right. First time at Halliday's, it's best not to linger. Some never get the chance to leave." I thanked them both, officially unnerved, and walked back to my rig. The snow was still pouring down, but something in their words stuck. I turned on the engine, pulled onto the road, and went east like Doris suggested. Sure enough, 5 miles later, it was as if the storm had vanished, like driving out from behind a heavy curtain. One moment, it was a full-on snowstorm. The next, the sky was crystal clear with stars twinkling above. I spotted the first travel plaza I could find and swung in, heading inside to ask about Halliday's. The guy behind the counter, a younger dude with a patchy beard, gave me a puzzled look. "Halliday's on Route 93? That joint burned down 3 decades ago, man. Old Halliday and his wife didn't make it out. Wait, what? I blurted out. That can't be. I was just there, had dinner, saw other trucks too. He shrugged casually. I don't know what to tell you, man. There's only an old slab and some broken down remains now. Been like that since before I was even born. I couldn't believe him. At sunrise, I got back in my rig and retraced the route. Found the turnoff where I'd pulled in during the storm, but there was nothing. Just an old, cracked concrete base, some scorched timbers, and a rust-eaten sign that barely still read Halliday's Rest Stop. No trucks, no cafe, no Doris. Over time, I've asked other drivers about it. A few, though very few, had eerily similar stories, always during surprise snowstorms and always mentioning the same waitress and old man, and always that same uneasy warning. Don't linger too long. I steer clear of Highway 93 now, especially in winter. This one still haunts me because, unlike other tales I've shared, I've never met another soul who swears by it like I do. Far as I can tell, it only happened to me. About 4 years back, I was running a late-night delivery on State Route 33, heading southeast out of Columbus toward the West Virginia line. It was April, the air was mild, skies were clear, full moon overhead. Perfect weather for the road. Around 1 a.m., I noticed headlights behind me. Not too odd, but they were closing in quick. Within seconds, a car was glued to my bumper, so close I couldn't see its beams. Just the reflection bouncing off my trailer. Any trucker will tell you that's a lethal situation. If I had to hit the brakes hard, that car would be crushed under my trailer, no doubt. I tapped the brakes lightly, flashing my tail lights as a heads up, but the car didn't fall back. I nudged my speed up, hoping they'd pass when the road opened to a passing lane. Soon as it widened, I expected them to shoot past, but nope, they stayed glued behind. At that point, I was losing patience. I pushed my speed up to 70, well above what's legal for a rig like mine, but the car stayed locked onto my rear bumper. Under the moonlight, I could barely make out its shape in my mirrors. It seemed like an old-school vehicle, maybe from the 1970s. Large, square, and bulky. Still, I couldn't spot the driver. This strange pursuit dragged on for nearly 20 minutes. Every single time the road opened into 2 lanes, I figured they'd finally pass me, but they didn't. They kept tailing me at a disturbingly tight distance, mirroring my every move. Eventually, I figured I'd pull into the next rest area and let them go by. One was only a few miles ahead, so I flicked on my signal early to show my plan. The instant my turn signal blinked, the car finally eased off just a bit. I rolled into the rest stop, which was completely deserted at that hour, and checked my mirror, expecting them to keep driving. Instead, they followed me in. By now, I was uneasy. Either someone had road rage, or worse, maybe they were trying to hijack my load. I reached for the baseball bat I always kept in the cab, just in case. The car stopped roughly 50 feet behind my truck. Through the mirror, I saw it clearly. An old-school sedan looked like a 70s Chevy Capri, dark green or bluish, hard to tell under the moon. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a man. Even from that distance, something about him didn't feel right. His movements were jerky, awkward, like his limbs didn't function normally. He was lanky, dressed in what appeared to be a suit, and he just stood there near the car, silently staring at my rig. There was no chance I was stepping out to face him. I made up my mind to get back on the highway. I fired up the engine, but before I could shift gears, my CB radio burst into static-filled life. "Driver, I have a message for you," a voice crackled through. It was emotionless, flat, with a metallic ring that didn't sound human. I froze, then grabbed the mic. "Who's speaking?" I asked. "I've been tracking you, driver," came the reply. My stomach dropped. "What are you after?" I demanded, eyes glued to my mirror. The man hadn't budged, still frozen next to his car like a statue. "I'm here to warn you. In 17 miles, you'll come to a bridge. Don't cross it." "Huh? Why not?" I said. But there was no reply. The channel went dead. I stared as the man moved back to his car with the same unnatural stiffness. He started it, reversed slowly, and rolled out of the lot, continuing down Route 33. I stayed parked for at least 10 minutes, trying to wrap my head around what just occurred. I thought about calling the authorities, but what could I even say? That a stranger followed me, knew my name, and warned me about a bridge? They'd probably think I was drunk or hallucinating. Eventually, I pulled myself together and got back behind the wheel. As the miles passed, I kept track, dread slowly rising with every passing sign. Whatever bridge he had mentioned had to be close. At mile marker 16, I spotted it ahead, a modest bridge stretching over a creek, nothing out of the ordinary. As I neared it, I noticed flashing lights up ahead. Drawing closer, I could make out police cruisers, an ambulance, and a tow truck. I eased off the gas and coasted toward the scene. A state trooper signaled me to stop. I rolled down the window and asked, "What happened?" "Drunk driver went through the guardrail about an hour back," he said. "Car's in the creek, and they're still working on getting the body out." "What kind of car was it?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Looked like an old Chevy Capri, maybe a 70s model. "Dark blue." I nodded and thanked him, pulling away slowly, my fingers trembling as they gripped the wheel. I've gone over that night 1,000 times since then. The same car that followed me had already crashed, and the driver was gone. What had warned me? The man's spirit? Something unexplained? I've taken Route 33 many times after that. I've never spotted that vehicle again, never heard that strange voice on the CB. Still, every time I reach that bridge, I ease up on the gas, half expecting to catch those headlights in the mirror once more. After driving long hauls for years, you build a gut feeling for freight. You learn to sense when something's off, a mismatch in documents, or a drop-off point that doesn't align with what's being hauled. Most of the time, there's a logical explanation, but now and then, the pieces just don't fit. This particular delivery took place 5 winters ago, during a biting cold spell in January. I was handed a last-minute job. One container to be taken to a spot on Chestnut Hill Road, about 30 miles outside Columbus. Right away, a few things struck me as strange. First, the paperwork barely said anything about what was inside, just labeled it as medical supplies. Second, the job had urgent status. I was supposed to make the delivery immediately, even outside normal operating hours. Third, The drop-off location wasn't a clinic or hospital. It pointed to what looked like an abandoned manufacturing plant in the middle of nowhere. I asked dispatch about it, but he told me the client paid extra for speed and privacy, and all documents checked out. Business wasn't great at the time. We just lost a big account, so I figured we were picking up whatever we could to stay afloat. I collected the container from a plain warehouse in Cincinnati. It was locked up tight, which wasn't unusual, but what threw me off was how light it felt. Way too light for a full load of medical equipment. I also realized the container was refrigerated, consistently holding at 34 degrees Fahrenheit. The trip began uneventfully. I hit the road around 9 p.m., expecting to arrive close to midnight. Despite a recent snowfall, the highways were mostly clear, and I made solid progress heading northeast. Roughly halfway through, my truck's electronics started going haywire. The GPS blinked in and out. The radio flipped through stations erratically, and even the digital dashboard flickered now and then. I blamed it on the freezing temperatures messing with the systems and pressed on. But as I neared the drop-off, the roads became more isolated and rough. The last stretch, 10 miles, was a narrow, snow-covered path that looked untouched for weeks. My headlights pierced the darkness, revealing nothing but thick woods on both sides. I reached the destination around 12:30 a.m. The facility was a massive slab of concrete, likely built in the 1940s or earlier. No signs hinted at its former use. No cars, no lights, apart from a single bulb above what seemed to be a loading bay, and not a soul in sight. Just this hulking, silent structure in the heart of the forest. I backed into the loading zone and called the number I had been given. A man answered instantly, like he'd been expecting it. "You're here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I've got a shipment of medical gear," I replied. "Leave it at the dock. Someone will handle it. I need a signature for delivery," I said, sticking to standard protocol. A long pause. "Stay in the truck. Someone will meet you." I waited inside my cab for about 15 minutes. The temperature had plunged below zero, and an eerie stillness blanketed the area. No wind, no wildlife, not a sound, just piercing cold and total silence. Then the loading door creaked open. 3 men stepped out, dressed in what looked like hazmat suits, minus the helmets. They moved like they'd done this dozens of times, barely glancing at me as they set to work on the container. One came up to my window. Up close, I saw he looked sickly. Sunken cheeks, heavy bags under bloodshot eyes. "Delivery signature," I said, holding up the tablet we used for records. He scribbled his name quickly. "You didn't see anything tonight," he said, handing it back. "What exactly is this place?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. He fixed his gaze on me for a second. "Government-funded research site. That's all you're allowed to know." I gave a silent nod. But as I slipped the pad back into its holder, I happened to glance at the container. The 2 other men had opened it, and I caught a brief look inside before they shifted to block my line of sight. It definitely wasn't filled with medical supplies. Inside were rows of tall cylindrical tanks, each one about the height of a person. They were coated with frost, clearly kept at sub-zero temperatures, and dozens of cables snaked from each tank to what looked like monitoring devices. The man beside my window noticed where I was looking. "Go now, and forget you saw anything." The tone of his voice left no room for argument. I shifted into drive and began to ease away. In the side mirror, I caught one last look. They were unloading a tank, and vapor was spilling from it like mist. For a split second, I thought I saw movement inside, something pressing against the glass. I drove off quickly but carefully, navigating the frozen road. Roughly a mile from that facility, the GPS flickered back to life, and all of my electronics returned to normal. I made it home in one piece that night. I haven't received any delivery orders for that site since, and frankly, I'm fine with that. Most people know about the Moonville Tunnel down in Vinton County, that old train tunnel wrapped in ghost legends. But there's another one, less known, hidden along a disused mining rail line in eastern Ohio. It's not on any travel blog, no paranormal investigators visit it, and I've never heard a name for it. It's just there, tucked away and forgotten. I wouldn't have known about it either, if not for my GPS rerouting me along a back road that passed nearby 6 years ago. I was transporting cargo from Cleveland to Marietta when a major crash had shut down the entire southbound freeway. My GPS rerouted me onto what it claimed was the quickest path. That path went from paved to gravel quickly, and it was barely wide enough for my truck. I nearly turned around, but the GPS insisted I was only 3 miles from a main road that would reconnect me to the interstate. Figuring it was safer than reversing, I continued on. That's when I saw it. An old stone arch jutting from a hillside, nearly swallowed by thick brush. I might have missed it altogether if the setting sun hadn't caught it just right. It was unmistakably built by hand, an ancient train tunnel from all appearances. I could have easily driven by and forgotten about it, but that's when my truck chose to break down. The engine shut off abruptly without any warning. I tried starting it again, but nothing worked. It was like the battery had been disconnected completely. The sky was beginning to darken, and I had no cell service out here. I figured my best bet was to walk and try to find a signal, aiming for the general direction where I thought the main road would be. I grabbed my flashlight, locked my truck, and started walking. Somehow, something drew me toward the tunnel first. I told myself it was just professional curiosity. I had never seen an abandoned tunnel up close before. As I got nearer, I saw how bad of shape it was in. The stone arch was falling apart, and a section of the tunnel had collapsed about 20 feet in. Rotted railroad ties lay scattered on the ground, and the steel rails had long been removed. I turned on my flashlight and shined it inside. The cool air flowing out carried with it a musty, mineral-like smell, nothing surprising for such an old tunnel. I was about to walk away when I heard it, faint but clear, a voice coming from deep within. "Help, please." I froze. The voice sounded like a child's, maybe 8 or 10 years old. "Hello?" I called out. "Who's there?" No answer. I hesitated, then stepped closer to the tunnel's entrance, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The collapse I had seen from the outside blocked about half the tunnel's width, leaving a narrow gap on the right side. "Is somebody in there? Do you need help?" I shouted louder this time. "Help me! I'm stuck!" the voice came again from somewhere beyond the collapse. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back to my truck and wait for another vehicle to come by. This was exactly how horror movies started. But if there really was a kid stuck in there, I squeezed past the fallen rocks, careful not to disturb any loose debris. Beyond it, the tunnel continued for about another 100 feet before ending in a solid wall of stone and dirt. A total collapse. "Where are you?" I shouted, scanning the walls and floor with my flashlight. No sign of anyone. "I'm here, behind the wall." The voice was clearer now, definitely coming from beyond the rubble. "They left me here." "Who left you? How long have you been trapped in there?" I called, stepping closer to the mass of debris with caution. "They left me after the collapse. They couldn't reach me." A cold shiver ran through me, but it had nothing to do with the temperature. This situation felt completely wrong. Deep down, I knew I should just leave. Whatever was going on, it wasn't a child in need of help, but something kept me frozen in place. Was it curiosity, compassion, or maybe just the strange draw of the tunnel? "I don't think I can help you," I said. "This collapse is huge." "You can," the voice persisted, now carrying a tone that was strangely persuasive, no longer resembling a child's at all. "Just move a few rocks and make an opening. I can squeeze through." That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. While the voice spoke about squeezing through, my flashlight caught movement in the pile of debris. The dirt between the rocks shifted, bulging outward as if something was pressing against it from the other side. "What are you?" I whispered. The voice dropped all pretense of being a child. It deepened, now carrying an unnatural resonance that seemed to reverberate through the very stones. "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for some company. Let me out. Let me ride with you, trucker. The things I could show you on the road at night." The dirt shifted again, this time with more force. Small rocks tumbled from the wall. Something dark began seeping through the gaps in the rocks. It wasn't water or mud, but something that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight rather than reflect it. I turned and ran, squeezing through the collapse, not stopping until I reached my truck. To my surprise, it started right up when I turned the key, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. In the dimming light, I saw a figure standing at the tunnel entrance, small like a child from a distance. But its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were unnaturally long and thin. It raised one of its elongated hands, almost as if it were waving goodbye. Most truck drivers in Ohio have had their close calls with deer. They're everywhere, especially during the rutting season when the bucks lose all sense of self-preservation. You get used to scanning the tree lines at dawn and dusk, watching for the telltale movement, the flash of eyes reflecting in your headlights. What happened to me on Route 13 near Mansville, though, was something else entirely. It was early November, the peak of deer collision season. I was transporting a load of paper goods to a distribution center, making good time despite the occasional fog that had settled into the low areas. The road winds through dense forest, with steep embankments in some places. There's not much room to react if something jumps out in front of you. Around 5:30 a.m., just before the sun rose, the fog had thickened significantly. I slowed my truck down to around 45 miles per hour with my high beams cutting through the gray haze as best they could. That's when I saw it, a massive buck standing right in my lane about 50 yards ahead. I hit the brakes, not too hard to avoid a jackknife, but firmly enough to slow down. The truck reduced speed, and I blared the horn, hoping to scare the animal away. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring straight at my approaching truck. As I got closer, I could see more clearly. It was the largest white-tailed buck I'd ever seen, possibly a 14-pointer, its antlers wider than my shoulders. But something wasn't right. Even through the fog, I could tell its hide wasn't the healthy brown typical of a deer. It was patchy, with spots that looked almost hairless, like raw flesh exposed. I was down to about 30 miles per hour, still closing the distance and still honking my horn. Any normal deer would have bolted by now. This one finally moved, but it didn't run. It lowered its head, pointing those huge antlers directly at my truck, and started pawing at the ground like it was preparing to charge. I swerved, taking my rig partially onto the shoulder, a dangerous move, but better than hitting something that size. As the cab of my truck passed the deer, I got a clear look at it through the side window. What I saw still doesn't make sense. The deer's face wasn't entirely like a deer's face. Parts of it looked almost human. Its eyes were strangely spaced, and the color wasn't right. A deep reddish brown that caught the light from my headlights and seemed to glow. And its mouth. Deer don't have lips that can curl into a grin. I kept driving, shaken, but telling myself that I had just seen a sick animal. Maybe it had chronic wasting disease or some other condition affecting its appearance and behavior. Then I checked my side mirror and saw it. The deer was chasing after my truck. Not beside the road like a scared deer would do, but directly behind me, in my lane, galloping at a speed no deer should be able to run. I was back up to nearly 50 miles per hour by then, and it was keeping up. I stared in horror as the creature gained on me. In the red hue of my taillights, its form seemed to flicker. At times, it looked like a normal deer, and at other times, it was something else entirely. Its body proportions were all wrong. The antlers, already enormous, appeared even larger now, spreading out like branches of a tree in impossible directions. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my truck to its limits on the fog-covered road. For a minute or so, the deer stayed right behind my trailer, matching my speed. But then, the road curved, and I lost sight of it for a brief moment. When the road straightened again, it was gone. I spent the rest of that drive clutching the steering wheel, my knuckles white, obsessively glancing in the mirrors. I arrived at the distribution center just as the sun started to rise, and I've never been so relieved to see a loading dock in my life. I didn't tell anyone what I had witnessed. Who would believe me? A deer with a human face chasing a semi down the highway at high speeds. I would sound insane, so I kept an eye out for news reports or perhaps someone else who had seen it. Or maybe there had been an accident involving a strange animal. But nothing. Over the next few months, however, I heard stories from other truckers, all from the same general area, all involving deer that seemed off or acted strangely. One driver described a buck standing on its hind legs as his truck passed by. Another swore he saw one with far too many legs, moving through the woods like a spider. Local hunters tell their stories too once they've had a few drinks. They talk about deer they've tracked that left human-like footprints, about finding bucks with twisted antlers, and about hearing strange whispers from the trees when field dressing their kills. In the years since, I've heard from locals who now call that stretch of road Wendigo Road. They say it's best not to drive it alone. I don't talk much about this experience, but I will for you guys. Some things are better left buried, filed away in that part of your mind that you don't open. But since I'm sharing these stories, I might as well tell the one that still wakes me up in a cold sweat some nights. 7 years ago, I was hauling construction materials from Columbus to a site in Jackson, a small town in southeastern Ohio. It was early March, and the weather was strange, warm enough to melt the snow during the day and cold enough to freeze everything solid at night. Perfect conditions for black ice. I was ahead of schedule and expected to arrive around 3 a.m. The road into Jackson winds through hilly terrain, with a series of sharp turns and a bridge crossing a deep ravine about 5 miles from town. As I approached that stretch, I slowed down to about 40 miles per hour, knowing that the conditions could be hazardous. The night was clear, with a quarter moon casting just enough light to outline the hills against the dark sky. As I rounded a bend, the bridge came into view, an old steel truss structure, probably dating back to the 1930s. As my headlights illuminated it, I saw something that made my heart race. A car was sideways on the bridge, its headlights facing the guardrail. I instantly slammed on the brakes, pumping them to avoid locking up. The trailer started to fishtail slightly on the icy road, but I managed to regain control. I was still about 100 yards from the bridge, rapidly slowing down. Then I saw the headlights of another car coming toward the bridge from the opposite direction. I remember thinking that they wouldn't have time to see the stalled vehicle. I honked the horn, flashed my lights, anything to warn the driver, but it was too late. The oncoming car hit a patch of ice just before the bridge, skidding and crashing into the stalled vehicle at full speed. The impact sent both cars smashing through the guardrail. I was able to stop my rig about 50 feet from the bridge. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and rushed toward the wreck, already dialing 911. But as I reached the bridge, I was struck with horror. There was no sign of an accident. The guardrail was intact, no cars in sight. I stood there, dazed and confused. Had I imagined it all? Was I more tired than I thought? The 911 operator answered, and I hesitated before telling her that I thought I had seen an accident, but might have been mistaken. She took down my information and said she'd send a deputy to check it out. I waited on the bridge for about 20 minutes until a sheriff's deputy arrived. He stepped out of his cruiser, flashlight in hand. "You reported an accident?" he asked, scanning the bridge with his light. "I thought I saw 2 cars crash through the guardrail," I said, feeling foolish now. but when I got here, there was nothing." He nodded, not looking too surprised. "Where exactly did you think you saw them go over?" I pointed to a section of the guardrail on the north side of the bridge. "Right there. One car was stopped sideways and another one hit it." The deputy walked to the spot and shined his flashlight down into the ravine. Then he turned to me with a strange look on his face. "There's a car down there. It looks like it's been there for a while, though. Probably not what you saw." My skin crawled. I joined him at the edge of the bridge and looked down. Sure enough, about 40 feet below, I could make out the rusted remnants of an old car, half submerged in the creek bed. "That's been there for years," the deputy remarked. "It was an accident in the 90s, I think. They recovered the bodies, but the car was too difficult to get out without the right equipment. The department decided it wasn't worth the cost." I stood there trying to make sense of what I thought I had seen. "Do you get a lot of accidents here?" I asked. The deputy hesitated before answering. "More than we should. This curve gets icy as hell in the winter. We've had 3 fatal crashes here in the last decade." "All on March 7th?" I asked, my voice tight. "Strangely enough, yeah." A cold shiver ran through me, unrelated to the chill in the air. "What's today's date?" "March 7th, he replied, shooting me a knowing look. "You're not the first to think they've seen an accident when there wasn't one. It happens every year around this time." His words sent a chill deep into my bones. "Local legend says it's a recurrence of the first accident back in '63, he continued. "That one was bad. A station wagon full of kids and a semi. 7 people died." I knew where this was going. "The truck driver?" "Only survivor," he confirmed. "Lived another 40 years, carrying that guilt with him. Locals say he comes back every year trying to prevent it from happening again." I thanked the deputy for his time, then walked back to my truck, shaken to the core. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts or time loops or whatever it was that he was hinting at, but what I saw was undeniable. The headlights, the crash, the cars tumbling over the guardrail. There was no damage when I arrived, but it was all as real as anything I'd ever experienced. I finished my delivery in Jackson that night, but after that, whenever I had trips through that area, I always took a different route, even if it meant adding an extra hour to my drive. The locals think it's because of the curves and ice. Let them. But every year on March 7th, I think about that bridge and wonder if some other driver is seeing those ghostly headlights, hearing the crash that never happens in their time, feeling the helplessness of watching an inevitable tragedy they can't stop. GPS is a trucker's double-edged sword. It can be a lifesaver when you're searching for a hard-to-find delivery spot, but it can also lead you straight into a mess. Low bridges, weight-restricted roads, or neighborhoods where big rigs have no business being. I learned early to question my GPS instructions, but even I didn't anticipate where it would lead me on a foggy night in late October about 4 years ago. I was hauling a partial load from Zanesville to Cambridge, taking back roads instead of doubling back to the interstate. It was around 10 p.m., and a heavy fog had rolled into the valleys, limiting visibility to no more than 30 feet in some spots. I was relying entirely on my GPS, driving cautiously and paying close attention to every sign as I approached each turn. About halfway through my trip, the GPS directed me to turn onto County Road 793. As I made the turn, I immediately noticed the pavement had quickly turned into a chipped, uneven surface barely wide enough for my truck. I eased off the gas, unsure whether to keep going or turn around, but the GPS kept insisting that I was on the right path. After driving for about 3 miles, the road took a sharp curve as I rounded a bend. Suddenly, the fog lifted. It was as if I was driving through a veil, emerging into a clear stretch where the night sky appeared above me, with stars twinkling brightly. Beneath them, I could make out a town I had never seen before. Perhaps 24 buildings lined up along a main street, with a few side streets branching off. The buildings had an old-time feel, resembling architecture from the early 1900s, but everything was immaculately preserved. Streetlights bathed the empty sidewalks in a soft, yellow glow. A sign near the edge of town greeted me. "Welcome to Roscoe, population 312. I had never heard of Roscoe, but I knew Ohio was home to numerous small towns that often don't appear on most maps. My GPS still showed that I was on the road, but no town was indicated, though that was common for older and smaller places. As I slowly drove down the main street, something strange caught my attention. There wasn't a single person in sight, despite several businesses that seemed to be open. The diner had its lights on, and I could make out place settings on the tables through the windows. The small movie theater's marquee proudly displayed The Last Picture Show, with Now playing beneath it, though the film was from the 1970s. Even the gas station appeared to be running smoothly, with signs showing the price of gasoline at $1.32 per gallon, a price I hadn't seen in 2 decades. I was low on fuel and figured this would be as good a place as any to stop. I pulled into the gas station, relieved to see there was enough room for my truck. Once I switched off the engine, I was struck by how eerily silent it was. There were no distant sounds of traffic, no music coming from nearby buildings, not even the faint hum of wind or insects. It was as though the world had gone completely still. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the pumps. They were older models, but they seemed functional. There were no card readers, which indicated this was a pay-inside station. As I walked toward the store, I noticed how loud my footsteps sounded in the overwhelming quiet. Looking through the windows, I could see the inside was well lit and fully stocked, but there was no sign of any attendants behind the counter. I opened the door, and the cheerful bell above the entrance rang out, startling me with its sudden sound in the silence. Inside, shelves were lined with snacks, drinks, and basic automotive supplies, and the packaging appeared to be from the 1990s. Behind the counter, a coffee pot sat resting on a burner, steam rising slowly from it. "Hello," I called out, trying to break the silence. "Is anyone working?" No answer. Growing more uneasy, I walked through the aisles. Everything seemed ordinary, except for the outdated products and the eerie absence of any people. There were no security cameras, and the registers looked like something out of the past. A mechanical cash register sat on the counter. Next to it, I noticed a local newspaper. I picked it up, searching for a date. The masthead read, "The Roscoe Register," with the date October 17th, 1997, and a headline celebrating the local high school football team's homecoming victory. That was over 20 years ago. I set the paper down, a sudden rush of discomfort urging me to leave. Whatever was happening here felt wrong, and I didn't want to be part of it. I rushed back to my truck and started the engine, feeling a wave of relief when it roared to life without issue. As I backed out of the gas station, I noticed movement in my side mirror, the first sign of life I had seen in this strange town. A man stood in the doorway of the station, staring at me. He was dressed in what looked like a mechanic's uniform, dark blue with a name patch that I couldn't quite read from this distance. Even from afar, something about his presence seemed off. He stood unnaturally still, and although I couldn't make out his face, I had an unsettling sense that he was grinning widely. He raised a hand in what seemed like a greeting, or perhaps a warning, as I drove away. I sped down the main street, passing the diner and the theater again. This time, I thought I saw faces in the windows, just fleeting glimpses of pale shapes following my progress. A chill ran down my spine, and I pushed my speed far beyond what was safe for the winding road. At the edge of the town where I had seen the welcome sign earlier, the fog still lingered like an impenetrable wall. I drove into it, my headlights revealing nothing but thick white mist for several seconds. When the fog cleared, I was back on the poorly maintained country road. I drove for another 10 miles before my heart rate finally returned to normal. When I reached a major intersection and saw highway signs I recognized, I pulled over and checked both my GPS and map apps. According to them, I had just driven along road 793, which stretched uninterrupted between the two nearby towns. There was no town named Roscoe. When I finally made it to my destination, I asked a few locals about Roscoe. Most had never heard of it. However, one elderly man at the delivery site gave me a peculiar look when I mentioned the name. "Roscoe's been gone for decades," he said. "The whole town was evacuated and condemned after a chemical spill from the plant nearby. They were supposed to demolish the town, but the funds never came through. The last time I heard, it was just a collection of decaying, abandoned structures gradually deteriorating." "How did you find out about it?" the old man asked. I muttered something about spotting an old road sign, quickly changing the topic to avoid further questions. Later that evening, I did some digging online about Roscoe. There had indeed been a small town by that name, evacuated in 1997 after a chemical spill contaminated the local water supply. The photos I came across depicted decaying and overgrown buildings, far from the pristine town I had witnessed. According to official records, the evacuation had been completed on October 17th, 1997, the same day listed on the newspaper I had found. I'm not sure why I feel compelled to share these experiences. Perhaps it's a way to reassure myself that I haven't lost my mind. Maybe it's a warning for other drivers to be cautious. Or maybe It's just that some things need to be documented and remembered, even if no one believes them. For the last 3 months, I've been on a leave of absence from driving. The company calls it stress leave, but both my dispatcher and I understand that it's something deeper. I have several more stories I could tell, but for now, I just need to take some time off from the road. I'm focusing on unwinding, trying to recover, and enjoy some peace away from the job. I appreciate everyone who has listened to this. Stay safe, everyone.